Parasite. An organism that lives in or on another organism and benefits by deriving nutrients at the host's expense. In the world we know, there are countless types of parasites. They of course come in all shapes and sizes, ranging from tapeworms to protozoans to fungi. You can get them by eating contaminated food, water, or various other means of infection. Many of these parasites can be lethal if left untreated, but luckily today, there are countless effective ways to treat these parasites once they have been detected. The problem is that parasites face a variety of issues. Some can be easily detected, like ticks or fleas. Other parasites have specific symptoms that allow for detection. Some even kill their host too quickly by targeting important organs or by stealing vital nutrients from their host. There is, however, one that has taken all of this into account. It bides its time and waits for the perfect opportunity to strike. Once it infects the host, there is no cure. Now, what I'm going to be talking about is completely fictional as far as we know. I mean, the universe is a big place, so it's possible that something like this exists in another galaxy. Now, if you're a fan of the Halo series, you would have heard of them. I'm talking about the Flood, also known as the Parasite. The Flood is a parasitic organism in the Halo universe that is one of the single greatest threats to all intelligent life. If left unchecked, they will easily take over an entire planet within a few months, and even potentially a solar system or worse. Now, the Halo games take place in the year 2550, give or take some years depending on each game. I will have to go into some lore to reveal their origin, but after that, I want to go into more of the science side of the Flood. A very long time ago, roughly 10 million years, there were ancient beings known as Precursors. No one knows how or why they existed. All we know is that they were very ancient and predated all current life forms. These beings went from galaxy to galaxy planting seeds of life and monitoring them. If a species evolved and progressed enough, that species would inherit the Mantle of Responsibility, which is a sort of mantra or fundamental rule created by the Precursors. It states that the most developed species is charged with tending to all life in the galaxy. Essentially, the chosen species would become the guardians of the galaxy. Eventually, two species reached the very peak of advancement. They were known as the Forerunners and humans. Yeah, we still got it. When the time came for the Precursors to choose, they chose humanity. There's an old saying that goes, you can only be jealous of someone who has something you think you ought to have for yourself. The Forerunners really took this to heart. When the Forerunners found out, they rebelled. They proceeded to hunt down and try to kill every last Precursor in an act of hatred and retaliation. They essentially threw a genocidal tantrum because they didn't get their way. That's like getting a blue bike instead of a red one for Christmas and then flying to the North Pole to murder Santa and his elves. The Precursors that survived went into hiding in various ways, but the one that led to the Flood was a type of dormancy. They broke themselves down into a white, desiccated, dry powder. The plan was to later revive themselves after the Forerunners had calmed down and moved on. Unfortunately for the Precursors, time now became their enemy. The powder slowly became corrupted and twisted, and when they reconstituted themselves, they were different. Some of these Precursors embraced their new twisted selves and became the Flood. They were now hell-bent on getting revenge on the Forerunners and twisting the universe to what they saw fit. What I just gave you was more of a bare-bones version of their origin story. If you really want to learn more about the Flood or Halo, there are quite a few good Halo YouTubers out there, but two of my personal favorites are Hiddenxperia and Halo Follower. I'll link them in the description below. All parasites have a way of transmitting themselves into their preferred hosts. Some hide along paths that are traveled, while others may hide themselves in sources of food or water. The Flood has quite a few ways to infect a host, but the most consistent way is by infection form. These creepy crawlies look like mutated spiders straight out of your nightmares and are roughly 3 to 4 feet tall. Although they can be dispatched by gunfire or a strong hit, infection forms are nothing to scoff at. They tend to overwhelm targets by their sheer numbers, so you won't be getting any kind of 1v1 action. Once they get close enough to you, they latch on with their tendrils and pierce your body. They then proceed to hijack your nervous system, killing you in the process in most cases. The host is unfortunately alive for most of this excruciating transformation, or in one particular case, all of it. They then repurpose the bones and tissues of your body by infecting it with flood supercells. Flood supercells are often described as thinking muscle and closely resemble both neurons and glial cells in terms of its physical structure. Once inside a host body, they essentially act like supercancer, rapidly infecting the cells of your body. The flood supercells capture and interface with host cells, which are quickly metabolized, broken down, analyzed, and reassembled into more flood cells that mirror the function of the targeted cell. They essentially create an infected copy of your cells. This process can also be accomplished with dead bodies, which is why the infection can spread so rapidly. This process all happens in a matter of seconds, and what once was is changed forever. Once they've converted the body, it now becomes an attack form. This form does exactly as its name suggests. Its job is to kill or mortally wound any suitable hosts. Looking at the bodies, you can see that the limbs are now converted into weapons to pierce, beat, and slash targets. This now leads us to their second form of transmission, bodily fluids and tissues. If a flood form wounds you or manages to get any of its fluids inside of your body, it has still infected you with the flood virus. Swapping any type of tissue or fluid with the flood exposes you to their supercells. This process takes slightly longer, but a person usually succumbs in a matter of minutes. After an attack form has outlived its use, it converts to a carrier form. This gross bulbous mutant popcorn is designed to incapacitate targets and spread infection form. Once they get close enough to a target, they explode, releasing a small concussive blast, which can easily incapacitate or knock out a person, leaving them wide open for infection forms. The final way to be infected occurs in areas that are completely taken over by the flood. These areas are covered in a thick flood biomass. At this point, the biomass begins to produce flood spores. Flood spores are essentially airborne flood supercell clusters. Once inhaled, they will slowly begin to take over the body. This process takes much longer, but eventually the host will succumb. Areas in which flood spores are present are usually covered in a thick green fog. Besides being aggressive in their takeover, the flood also have extremely dangerous traits that allow them to quickly and effectively spread. In the initial infection, they are wild and random when seeking out victims. However, after they have amassed enough biomass, they condense the most intelligent victims into what is known as a Proto Gravemind. This is what you would call Phase 2 of their invasion. This is essentially the brain of the flood. At this point, the flood now possess a hive mind mentality, meaning that all of their minds are now linked. The Proto Gravemind can communicate and coordinate with the various forms of flood in the area. The worst part is that anyone brought to a Proto Gravemind is not immediately killed. Although it absorbs you into its mass, it also slowly breaks into your mind through torture. Once it has extracted everything you know, it kills you. Having so much information allows them to move efficiently and effectively to overwhelm the inhabitants in the area. This also means that they will begin to use counter tactics against any countermeasures used against them. As more organisms fall victim to the flood, it acquires more and more information along with biomass. This allows the flood to access the technology and weapons of the world, making them even harder to contain and kill. This actually reminds me of the planetary experiment performed by James V. McConnell. His hypothesis was that engram, which represents memory, was encoded into the DNA of living things. He then trained one set of planaria to navigate a maze. Once he was confident that they knew how to navigate it, he ground them up and fed them to other planaria in hopes that they would inherit the information that their predecessors had learned. The flood are able to perform this incredible feat, which drastically increases their chances of success. Once Proto Graveminds have collected enough biomass, they transition to a Gravemind. This is now officially stage 3 of an invasion and basically means there is practically no way to stop the flood. Graveminds are made from thousands of corpses and are very much aware of what's going on. They are also essentially omniscient or all-knowing. This is due to the fact that they not only possess the knowledge of every creature that they've absorbed while on the planet, but they are also able to recall any information that previous Graveminds have acquired from past centuries. This makes them practically impossible to strategize against and fight. Only 2 have existed in all of the history of Halo. The oldest of the two was killed when the Halo Ring super weapon was activated and wiped out all intelligent life. The second Gravemind is currently still alive. At this point, if a planet has interplanetary means of travel, the Flood will launch their ships off into space to crash onto a new world and begin the process all over again. There are very few effective ways of combating the Flood. Surprisingly, at one point there was an actual cure to prevent infection by the Flood. It was basically a super flu shot in simpler terms. It essentially allowed host cells to become immune to Flood supercells. This would prevent them from transforming any bodies, which would drastically halt their takeover of a world. This cure was developed by the humans at the time, but the information was lost when all life was wiped from the galaxy. The second way is to destroy Flood bodies and any corpses by burning, toxification, or any other means that renders a body uninhabitable. Destroying the bodies prevents the Flood from gaining biomass and information, and once again keeps them from progressing. The final way was to starve the Flood. If the Flood are unable to find any suitable hosts, it goes into a dormant hibernative state. While this didn't kill all of the Flood, it stopped them from advancing their invasion any further. This is exactly what the Halo Rings did. By wiping out all suitable intelligent life, the Flood were left without a food source and either died out or were forced to go dormant. The reason I wanted to make this video is because not only am I a Halo fan, but I also found the Flood very interesting from a scientific perspective. They act as a predatory species, but also have traits of viruses, bacteria, and fungi. Initially starting out, they are somewhat random, but as they progress, they become smarter and more methodical in their approach. They literally learn their targets inside and out and will exploit any and all weaknesses. This is what makes the Flood so interesting to me. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Check below for links and materials used.